Adolf Hitler.
Hitler's early life and background. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small town in Austria-Hungary, near the German border. His father, Alois Hitler, was a strict and authoritarian customs official, while his mother, Clara Polzel, was gentle and affectionate. Hitler was very close to his mother, who would later die of breast cancer in 1907, a loss that deeply affected him for the rest of his life. As a child, Hitler was not particularly exceptional in school. He performed well in some subjects, particularly art, but struggled with discipline and formal education. His early years were marked by tension with his father, who insisted he pursue a career in civil service, while Hitler dreamed of becoming a painter. When he was 16, Hitler left school without completing his final exams. After his father's death in 1903, he became even more withdrawn and focused on his artistic ambitions. In 1907, Hitler moved to Vienna, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in hopes of being admitted to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. He applied twice, once in 1907 and again in 1908, but was rejected both times for lack of talent in painting human figures. The rejection devastated him. He remained in Vienna for several years, living a marginal, often homeless existence, selling postcard sketches and living in men's hostels. During his Vienna years, Hitler's worldview began to form. He came into contact with deeply nationalist and anti-Semitic ideas that were spreading in the city at the time.
Es ist eine kleine, wurzellose, internationale Clique, die Völker gegeneinander hetzt, die nicht will, dass sie zur Ruhe kommen. Es sind das die Menschen, die überall und nirgends zu Hause sind, die nirgends einen Boden haben, auf dem sie gewachsen sind, sondern die heute in Berlin leben, morgen genauso gut in Brüssel sein können, übermorgen in Paris oder mit in Prag oder in Wien oder in London und die sich überall zu Hause fühlen. Es sind die einzigen, die wirklich als internationale Elemente anzusprechen sind, weil sie überall ihre Geschäfte betätigen können. Aber das Volk kann ihnen ja nicht nachfolgen. Das Volk ist ja gekettet an seinen Boden, ist ja gekettet an seine Heimat, ist ja gebunden an die Lebensmöglichkeiten seines Staates, der Nation.
While it's debated how much these ideas influenced him early on, it is clear that Vienna exposed him to racism, German nationalism, and the idea of a strong authoritarian state, concepts that would later become central to his ideology. By 1913, Hitler left Vienna and moved to Munich, partly to avoid mandatory military service in Austria. However, when World War I broke out in 1914, he enlisted voluntarily in the German army. He served as a messenger on the Western Front and participated in major battles such as the Somme and Ypres. He was wounded twice and was temporarily blinded in a gas attack. Hitler was decorated with the Iron Cross, First Class, a rare award for someone of his rank corporal, and he was proud of it for the rest of his life. For Hitler, the end of the war in 1918 was not just a military defeat, but a personal crisis. Like many nationalists, he believed Germany had been stabbed in the back by politicians, communists, and Jews who, he claimed, had betrayed the nation. This conspiracy theory, the Dolchstoßlegende, became a core part of his rhetoric in later years. After the war, Germany was in chaos. Hitler remained in the army and was assigned to spy on small political groups. One of them, the German Workers' Party, impressed him. He joined it in 1919 and quickly became its most prominent speaker. In 1920, the party was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. By combining violent nationalism, anti-Semitism, and charismatic oratory, Hitler soon emerged as the face of this new political force. To understand Adolf Hitler's rise, it's crucial to look at Germany's situation after World War I, a period marked by political instability, economic hardship, and social unrest. The war ended in November 1918 with Germany's defeat. The country was exhausted, millions of soldiers had died or been wounded, cities were damaged, and its economy was shattered. But the end of fighting did not bring peace or stability. Instead, Germany faced one of its most turbulent chapters. The German Empire collapsed, and the Kaiser abdicated. In its place, the Weimar Republic was established, a new democratic government. However, this young republic was fragile. It had to navigate enormous challenges right from the start. One of the most significant blows was the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919. This treaty formally ended the war but imposed harsh penalties on Germany. It required Germany to accept full responsibility for the war, known as the War Guilt Clause. Germany had to pay massive reparations to the Allied powers, surrender territory, and drastically reduce its military forces. These terms humiliated many Germans. They felt unfairly punished and betrayed by their own leaders, whom they called the November criminals, for signing the treaty. This sense of humiliation and injustice fueled widespread resentment and anger across the country. On the economic front, Germany was devastated. The cost of the war, combined with reparations, led to severe financial strain. By 1923, hyperinflation had reached catastrophic levels. Money became almost worthless. For example, the price of a loaf of bread skyrocketed from a few marks to billions of marks in just a few years. People's life savings were wiped out, and poverty became widespread. Political violence was common. The country was polarized between right-wing nationalist groups and left-wing communists. Street clashes, assassinations, and uprisings occurred frequently. The government struggled to maintain order, often relying on paramilitary groups like the Freikorps to suppress left-wing uprisings. Amid this chaos, extremist parties found a receptive audience. Many Germans longed for strong leadership to restore national pride, stability, and economic prosperity. This was the fertile ground on which Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party would later plant their message, promising to overturn the Treaty of Versailles, rebuild Germany's strength, and restore its glory. The Weimar Republic's fragility, economic crisis, and political polarization set the stage for the rise of authoritarianism and radical ideologies throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. In 1923, Hitler and the Nazis attempted the Beer Hall Putsch, a failed coup to seize power in Munich. The uprising was quickly crushed, and Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison. But the prison time became an opportunity. During his 9 months in Landsberg prison, Hitler wrote his political manifesto, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, which outlined his ideas about race, the need for Lebensraum living space, and his plan to overturn the Treaty of Versailles. After his release, Hitler took a different approach. Instead of seizing power by force, he focused on gaining support through legal political means, such as elections and propaganda. Throughout the late 1920s, the Nazi Party expanded its reach. The Great Depression, which began in 1929, caused massive unemployment and poverty in Germany. People became desperate for change and found Hitler's promises appealing, restoring Germany's economy, rebuilding military strength, and overturning the humiliating post-war treaties. Hitler and the Nazis expertly used propaganda, rallies, and the newly developed mass media, including radio and film, to spread their message. By 1932, the Nazi Party became the largest party in the Reichstag German parliament, though they didn't have an outright majority. Political instability continued as no party could form a strong government. On January 30, 1933, under pressure from conservatives and business elites who believed they could control him, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. This marked the beginning of Hitler's legal rise to total power, a process that would transform Germany forever. Adolf Hitler's appointment as Chancellor on January 30, 1933, was a turning point in German history. But becoming Chancellor was just the first step in a carefully planned process to establish a totalitarian dictatorship. When President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler, many conservatives and elites believed they could control him and use his popularity to stabilize the country. They were wrong. Hitler quickly moved to consolidate power by exploiting a crisis that soon followed: the Reichstag fire on February 27, 1933. The German parliament building was set ablaze, and the Nazis blamed a Dutch communist, Marinus van der Lubbe. Whether or not the Nazis were involved remains debated, but Hitler used the event to stoke fear of a communist uprising. The very next day, President Hindenburg signed the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended many civil liberties, including freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to assembly. This decree allowed the Nazis to arrest thousands of political opponents, especially communists and socialists. With the opposition weakened, Hitler pushed for the Enabling Act in March 1933. This law gave Hitler's cabinet the power to enact laws without the Reichstag's approval, even laws that violated the Weimar Constitution. The Enabling Act passed, largely because the Communist Party deputies were arrested or intimidated, and the Social Democrats abstained or voted against it without enough power to stop it. With this act, Hitler had effectively become a dictator. He used these powers to outlaw other political parties, dissolve trade unions, and imprison political enemies. Germany became a one-party state under Nazi rule. In August 1934, when President Hindenburg died, Hitler combined the offices of Chancellor and President, taking the new title of Führer, leader. This gave him supreme command over the government and military. To ensure loyalty, Hitler created a vast propaganda machine led by Joseph Goebbels, controlled the press and education, and used the Gestapo, the secret police, to crush dissent. He also reshaped the military with an oath of personal loyalty sworn directly to him, not to Germany or the Constitution. Through these measures, Hitler destroyed Germany's democracy and established a totalitarian regime, controlling every aspect of political, social, and cultural life. The stage was set for the aggressive policies and horrific atrocities that followed. Once Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party seized control of Germany, they quickly set about transforming the country according to their radical and dangerous ideology. At the core of Nazi ideology was the belief in the superiority of the so-called Aryan race, typically defined as people of Northern European descent, especially Germans. Nazis propagated the idea that Aryans were destined to rule, and that other groups, especially Jews, were racially inferior and a threat to the purity and strength of the nation. Anti-Semitism, hatred, and discrimination against Jewish people was not a new phenomenon in Europe, but the Nazis made it central to their political platform. They claimed Jews were responsible for Germany's defeat in World War I, the economic hardships that followed, and were allegedly conspiring to weaken or dominate the world. In 1933, immediately after gaining power, the Nazis began passing laws to isolate and oppress Jewish people. One of the first major acts was the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service, which banned Jews and political opponents from working in government jobs. The Nazis also launched a nationwide boycott of Jewish businesses in April 1933, accompanied by violent intimidation. Anti-Jewish propaganda was spread through education, newspapers, radio, films, and mass rallies, portraying Jews as enemies of the German people. The persecution escalated with the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, which legally stripped Jews of German citizenship and forbade marriage or sexual relations between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. These laws institutionalized racial discrimination and laid the groundwork for further oppression. In 1938, the situation worsened dramatically with Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. On November 9-10, Nazi paramilitary forces and mobs attacked Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues across Germany and Austria. Hundreds of people were killed or injured, thousands arrested, and Jewish property was destroyed. Kristallnacht marked a shift from social and legal discrimination to violent, state-sponsored terror. Alongside anti-Semitism, the Nazis targeted other groups they considered undesirable or enemies of the state. This included Roma gypsies, people with disabilities, political dissidents, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and others. The regime used concentration camps to imprison and torture these groups, starting with Dachau in 1933. By controlling the media and education, the Nazis spread their racist ideology throughout German society, indoctrinating youth with the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls. This systematic persecution was a terrifying warning of the atrocities that would follow during World War II, culminating in the Holocaust, the industrialized genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others. After Adolf Hitler solidified his control over Germany, he aggressively pursued a foreign policy aimed at reversing the humiliations of the Treaty of Versailles and restoring Germany's power and prestige on the world stage. This expansionist agenda set Europe on a collision course with war. One of Hitler's first major moves was the remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936. Under the Treaty of Versailles, this region along the French border was to remain demilitarized as a buffer zone. Hitler defied this restriction by sending troops into the Rhineland, betting that France and Britain would not intervene. When they didn't, Hitler gained confidence and momentum. Next, Hitler sought to unite all German-speaking peoples under one Reich, a policy called Anschluss. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria without bloodshed, a move widely popular among Austrians but forbidden by the Versailles Treaty. The world responded with only muted protests. Later that year, Hitler turned his attention to Czechoslovakia, specifically the Sudetenland, a border region with a significant ethnic German population. He claimed that the Sudeten Germans were being oppressed and demanded the territory be ceded to Germany. In September 1938, Britain and France pursued a policy of appeasement at the Munich Conference. They agreed to Hitler's demands, hoping to avoid war by conceding the Sudetenland without consulting Czechoslovakia. Hitler promised this would be his last territorial claim in Europe. But this promise was a deception. In March 1939, Germany violated the agreement by occupying the rest of Czechoslovakia, turning it into a protectorate, and exposing the failure of appeasement. Meanwhile, Hitler negotiated a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, in August 1939. This secret agreement shocked the world because the Nazis and Soviets had been bitter ideological enemies. The pact contained a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. With the Soviet Union neutralized, Hitler felt free to launch his final act. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland using a brutal tactic called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, combining fast-moving tanks, aircraft, and infantry to overwhelm the enemy quickly. This invasion triggered Britain and France, who had pledged to protect Poland, to declare war on Germany, marking the official start of World War II. Hitler's aggressive expansion and blatant violations of international agreements had shattered the fragile peace in Europe. His vision of a vast German empire, or Lebensraum, living space, would soon plunge the world into its deadliest conflict. World War II, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, was the deadliest and most widespread conflict in human history. It involved most of the world's nations and was fought on multiple continents. At the center was Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, whose aggressive policies triggered the war. The war began with Germany's invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939. Using blitzkrieg tactics, German forces quickly overwhelmed Polish defenses. Britain and France, honoring their promises to Poland, declared war on Germany, officially starting the conflict. In 1940, Germany launched a series of rapid and devastating campaigns across Western Europe. They invaded Denmark and Norway in April, securing key strategic positions. In May, they attacked Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The most dramatic was the invasion of France, which fell in just 6 weeks. By June 1940, Paris was occupied, and the French government surrendered. Meanwhile, Britain stood alone against Germany in what became known as the Battle of Britain. From July to October 1940, the German Luftwaffe carried out massive air attacks against British cities and military targets. But the British Royal Air Force successfully defended the skies, marking the first major defeat for Hitler's forces. In June 1941, Germany broke its non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union by launching Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion aimed at conquering the vast Soviet territories. Initially successful, German forces pushed deep into Soviet land, but the brutal Russian winter and fierce Soviet resistance halted their advance. In December 1941, the war expanded dramatically when Japan, an Axis ally of Germany, attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This surprise attack led the United States to declare war on Japan, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S., turning the conflict into a truly global war. The tide of the war began to turn in 1942 and 1943. The Soviet Union won a decisive victory at the Battle of Stalingrad, marking the beginning of a powerful Soviet counteroffensive. In North Africa, Allied forces, led by the British and Americans, defeated the German Afrika Korps. In June 1944, the Allies launched D-Day, the massive invasion of Nazi-occupied France at Normandy. This operation opened a Western front in Europe, forcing Germany to fight a two-front war. The Allies gradually pushed German forces back into their own territory. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the U.S. began a campaign of island hopping, reclaiming territories occupied by Japan. By April 1945, Allied forces were closing in on Berlin from both east and west. Adolf Hitler committed suicide on April 30, 1945, as Soviet troops entered the city. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 7, 1945, marking the end of the war in Europe. World War II continued in the Pacific until August 1945, when the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender. The war resulted in the deaths of an estimated 70 to 85 million people, including millions of civilians. It reshaped the world politically, economically, and socially, setting the stage for the modern era. Among the most horrific and tragic chapters of World War II was the Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored genocide carried out by Nazi Germany, aimed primarily at the Jewish people, but also targeting millions of other innocent victims. The Holocaust was not a sudden event, but the result of years of escalating persecution that began as soon as the Nazis came to power in 1933. Anti-Semitic laws, social exclusion, and violence laid the groundwork for the industrialized murder that would follow. By 1941, with the invasion of the Soviet Union and the expansion of Nazi control across Europe, the Nazis implemented what they called the final solution, the plan to annihilate the Jewish population of Europe. The genocide was carried out through a network of concentration camps, extermination camps, ghettos, and mass shootings. Some of the most notorious camps were Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Majdanek, where millions were murdered, often in gas chambers designed for mass killing. Victims were transported from all over Europe in overcrowded trains, enduring horrific conditions. Families were torn apart, subjected to forced labor, starvation, brutal medical experiments, and torture. The Nazis also targeted other groups, including Roma gypsies, people with disabilities, Poles, and other Slavic peoples, Soviet prisoners of war, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and political dissidents. By the end of the war, it is estimated that 6 million Jews, about two-thirds of Europe's Jewish population, were murdered. The Holocaust remains one of the most devastating examples of hatred, prejudice, and the consequences of unchecked totalitarianism. Survivors' testimonies, extensive documentation, and the physical evidence uncovered after the war ensure that the world never forgets this atrocity. Remembering the Holocaust is a solemn duty to honor the victims, to learn from the past, and to stand against hatred and bigotry in all forms today. As World War II dragged on, Adolf Hitler's once unstoppable march toward domination began to crumble under the weight of military defeats and internal chaos. By 1943, the tide had decisively turned against Germany. The crushing defeat at the Battle of Stalingrad marked the beginning of a relentless Soviet advance from the east. Meanwhile, the Western Allies made significant gains following the D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944, liberating occupied France and pushing toward Germany's borders. Hitler, however, remained stubbornly committed to a strategy of total war and refused to allow his generals to consider retreat or surrender. His increasing isolation and erratic decisions weakened Germany's war effort. Inside the Führerbunker, his underground bunker in Berlin, the war was lost, but Hitler refused to accept defeat. By early 1945, Soviet forces were closing in on Berlin. On April 16, the Red Army launched a massive assault on the city. Despite fierce resistance, the situation was hopeless. In his final days, Hitler married his longtime companion Eva Braun on April 29, 1945. The very next day, April 30th, as Soviet troops encircled Berlin, Adolf Hitler committed suicide alongside Eva Braun. His death marked the symbolic end of Nazi Germany. Shortly after, on May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Allies, bringing an end to the war in Europe. Hitler's downfall was the result of a catastrophic ideology that led to devastation across the continent, millions of deaths, and unparalleled human suffering. His death sealed the collapse of the regime he built through propaganda, terror, and war. The end of World War II and the fall of Adolf Hitler left Germany and the entire world facing an enormous task of reckoning and rebuilding. Germany was left in ruins, its cities devastated by Allied bombing, its economy shattered, and millions of people dead or displaced. The country was divided into occupation zones controlled by the Allied powers: the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. One of the immediate challenges was confronting the horrors of the Holocaust. The world learned of the unimaginable scale of genocide, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims. The Nuremberg trials, held from 1945 to 1946, were historic military tribunals that prosecuted leading Nazi officials for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. These trials established important precedents in international law and underscored the principle that individuals and leaders could be held accountable for such atrocities. Politically, the war's aftermath reshaped the global order. The United Nations was founded in 1945 to promote peace and prevent future conflicts. The Cold War began as tensions rose between the Soviet Union and Western allies, dividing the world into competing ideological blocs. In Germany, the division hardened into two separate states by 1949. West Germany, a democratic and capitalist nation aligned with the West, and East Germany, a communist state under Soviet influence. Hitler's legacy is a stark warning about the dangers of totalitarianism, hatred, and unchecked power. His ideology led to immense suffering and showed how propaganda, prejudice, and militarism can destroy societies. Today, remembrance of the Holocaust and World War II plays a crucial role in educating new generations, promoting human rights, and combating racism and intolerance. Museums, memorials, and education programs around the world stand as reminders to never forget the past, ensuring that such tragedies are not repeated. The aftermath of Hitler's reign left deep scars, but also forged a global commitment to peace, justice, and human dignity.